Hi everyone, my name is Hannah. Welcome back to Background Basics. This is part 2, and today we're going to talk about clouds and rocks. So this is in no way going to be comprehensive. It's really just a few kind of tips and tricks that I have picked up about rendering clouds and rendering rocks. Most of this is going to be about rocks. I'm only going to spend a little bit of time on clouds. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm gonna use this picture as my cloud reference. And like I kind of said in the reference video, part 1, I'm not super concerned about making it look like the picture. I'm more concerned with making it believable. So I'm gonna start out with the sky, and I always make my sky a gradient. I usually start out with some kind of turquoise color. I think that was a little too bright for me. I'm gonna go with something kind of light. And then I'll take kind of a darker purpley kind of blue, and I'll use that as the top color. Oops, that was too big. So something like that. Okay. Now I'm going to block in my clouds. I like to use this sub cloud brush that I got from Charlie Bowater's free brush pack. If you just Google it, you can find it on Gumroad. Anyway, so when I think about rendering clouds, I usually like to think about it as building the cloud from the top down. So I'm kind of focusing on the highlight areas, and I'm kind of lowering the opacity in areas that are going to be more in shadow. This is kind of a technique that may not come naturally to you if you have a background in traditional art like me, especially in watercolor or colored pencil or graphite. Some traditional mediums that do kind of lend themselves to this method well are gouache and acrylic and oil. But digital is really the best medium for doing this kind of light on dark technique. And this light on dark thing is something that I use to render just about everything. I think it works really well and lends itself really to cohesiveness in the picture. Making things look like they go together, making things look like they're part of the same picture instead of like a bunch of things stuck on top of each other. Anyway, so I'm just going to put in a few cloud shapes here. Notice in the picture that there are a lot of variations in the sizes of the clouds. So there are some kind of big ones and some little ones. That's a really good thing to think about for any kind of organic background thing, is that you need to have size variation in order to make it look like really a good organic natural background. Okay, so I'm going to kind of stick with that right now. Not perfect, but I've just blocked in a few cloud shapes. And now I'm going to take something. Actually, let me start by picking up this color from the sky, the more purpley tone. I'm going to move it even more purple and kind of desaturate it a little bit. You'll see in the picture that the shading on the cloud looks almost kind of greenish gray. Something that I like to do stylistically is shade with a more purple color. I never shade with gray because it makes it seem like it's kind of a sticker stuck onto the sky, and I want it to look like it's part of the sky. So I'm going to stick with the same brush, and I'm just going to go in kind of the darkest areas of the clouds. And the darkest areas are going to be the areas that are most dense. So when you think about that, it's not going to be the edges of the clouds, it's kind of going to be the bottom center area. So when I'm shading, I only want to put this in like the kind of bottom center area, the places that are the most dense. It's important not to overdo it with the shadow on this, because if you overdo it with the shadow, it will not look like a cloud. And I know because I have done that so many times. I don't like to make my clouds really detailed either. They're kind of a background element of the background for me. And the smaller ones don't need really any shading at all. All right, and now that I've done that, I'm gonna go back to my white. I'm just gonna put a few kind of little detail areas in. Just some kind of things to break up the outline a little bit. Occasionally, I will put a white line on the bottom of the cloud just to kind of highlight that there is like another edge over there, that's kind of the opposite edge of the cloud. You don't see that so much in this picture that I'm using as reference, but see it in other pictures sometimes. Okay, that's about going to do it for my clouds. Like I said, I don't like to do anything that's super detailed or highly rendered because I prefer other things to kind of be the focus of my drawing or the focus of my background. So with that, let's move on to some rocks. So this is the rock that I'm going to start off with. And I'm going to choose a color that's kind of a darker local color, but not the darkest color of the rock. So I'm going to choose, So I'm going to choose something that is like this kind of color, kind of value. I'm not going to choose something that's like this crack right here. So I'll just look at the picture. It looks kind of like sort of purpley color. And I like to use this Texture 2 brush. I think this also came from the Charlie Bowater free brush pack. So I'll just go in and kind of start blocking out the general shape of this rock, these two rocks. Once again, doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to look just like the reference. I'm just kind of using it as a guide. Okay, so now that I've kind of got this shape blocked in, I'm gonna go in with a darker color, something that's gonna be the color of the darkest areas on this rock. I'm just gonna kind of do a little bit more blocking out of where the edges of things are so I can get a better sense of the shapes involved here. Definitely don't go overboard with this part. It's better to go a little under with the hard dark shading to start out with, and you can fix it later if you need to. And remember that this is an organic object, something that you find in nature. So there's a lot of kind of idiosyncrasies and weird squiggles. You just don't want to make it look too perfect. I'm really trying to keep in mind the surfaces that I'm seeing here, the different faces of the rock. That's what's going to make it look three-dimensional. Okay, that's pretty good to start off with, actually. It's pretty good to start off with. Now, I'm going to take something that's a lighter color, maybe something that's kind of warm, pinkish, and I'm going to start blocking in the lighter areas of the rock. This is another example of painting light on dark, something that if you're a traditional artist, or if you have been a traditional artist, might not come too naturally to you. Now this might look kind of a weird color. I might adjust it later. It doesn't look like the reference, that's okay. I'm kind of trying to leave space where I know the darker parts of the rock will kind of be. I'm kind of trying to leave space for cracks and stuff, for the edges of these areas. I'm paying attention to, I don't know what you call it, but it's like the grain of the rock, like the direction that the little striations are going in. So that's part of what makes a rock look like a rock. And it's okay to be scribbly. I'm a pretty scribbly background artist because I think it just adds that kind of organic element to it that I really like. I'm using the reference as much as I need to without getting hung up on making it look like that rock exactly. Okay, so now I'm just gonna go even just a few shades lighter and do some other surfaces here. And let me take this, and I'm gonna take something that's kind of warm to do some shading with. I'm just looking for areas that need more kind of definition, like these striations in here, the undersides or the edges of surfaces. Okay, it's getting close to being done here. I think that'll probably do it for this rock. And I'm pretty happy with it. You know, it doesn't look like the reference rock in color at all, but that's all right. It's a purple rock. So the last thing that I want to talk about is rock texture. This is really something that's important when you don't have a defined like boulder or like a defined rock. You just need this rock surface, like a wall of rock, and you need to make it look like it's made of rock. So I'm just going to put in kind of a local color here. I'm not going to make any kind of rock looking things. It's just going to be like a rock surface. If you're drawing a close-up rock, this is useful as well. So the first thing that I'm going to do is create a clipping mask. And I'm going to take another bow water brush, which is the snow thing. I'm going to use something kind of lighter. I'm just going to go in and do that. And then I might take something. Don't be afraid to use different colors with rocks also. Rocks are made of like a lot of different minerals and elements, which are all different colors. They refract light in different ways, so it's okay to put weird colors in your rocks. And I'll do this again with some darker colors. I'll do kind of like a dark green color. And I put this on, no, I'm gonna leave it normal. But I'll just kind of lower the opacities on these. Now what I'm gonna do is take this brush, something that has a lot of texture. This is one of the default Procreate brushes. I think I found it in charcoals, but I don't remember. You can see I keep all the brushes that I use most commonly in this folder called My Brushes. Anyway, I'm going to take this local color, pick something darker, make the brush big, and just use the side of my stylus. If you have the Apple Pencil, if you lay it on its side, it uses much more texture than if you just draw with it, like with the point right on the screen. So I'll do that. I'll put it on multiply. And I'll do it again with a lighter color. Then it's light and less saturated. This is also the brush that I use sometimes when I want to put moss on rocks. Okay, I like that. I'll use that with a green and kind of use that as my moss base. Okay, now what we're going to do is this. So this is something really important to know about like highly textured brushes and like using fancy brushes like I've just been using, is that it's not like an instant fix. Like those brushes are not going to give you instant rock. You have to go in with a rendering brush and build the rock using what you've already put on the page with the textured brushes. And I do this with foliage too, and I'll talk about that next week. But I'm going to take this, my texture brush, my texture 2 that I've been using. I'm going to pick something that's kind of green and dark. And I'm using what I see. Let me set this layer to multiply. I'm using what I see in the rock already. I'm just letting my eye kind of wander, kind of pick up these areas. I'm just following those with my brush. Sometimes you can color in larger areas, sometimes you just want to make some squiggles. But I'm just using what the texture has already kind of given me and enhancing it using this little rendering detail brush. And remember from the last picture that it's organic, it's squiggly, it's not perfect. Try not to make any real straight lines. Just kind of going in here and letting my brush wander. Trying to define some edges. This is really good for creating like weathered rock because it kind of looks like, you know, wind and water, and the different minerals erode at different rates. Some of them are a lot softer than others, and they will leave areas in the rock much faster than other minerals. So just like in the last picture, I'm kind of trying to define some edges, some areas, some different surfaces that are in here. Try not to make anything too uniform. Just like with the clouds, you kind of want to vary the size of the marks that you're making. And now I'm going to go in with something lighter, a lighter color again. I'm a very systematic person. I like to have a formula for how to do things and make formulas when I can. And I'll just do the same kind of thing using what I've already drawn, the textures, the edges, to create contrast and kind of build that rock texture using what I've already gotten from these texture brushes and the lines that I've made. Adding this lighter color is really just to build contrast here. I'm doing a lot more of like filling in areas than I did with the darker brush. It's probably pretty good. Sometimes I like to add some little like lichen areas. I'll stick with the same brush, but use some kind of like light colors. Just create some, you know, when rocks have those kind of like flat lichen things. So that's kind of my rock texture. And it's just kind of one type of rock. There are a lot out there. You know, like I said at the beginning, this is not a comprehensive guide at all. It's just a few tips that I have for creating rocks and clouds. Like I said in the last video, if you want to create some rocks and clouds using these tips, and if you want to post it on Instagram and tag me, popd at popt.ii, I'll post your work in my story until next week. So as I kind of alluded to earlier, next week I'm going to talk about some foliage, some trees, and just how to create that kind of foresty kind of plant stuff. So I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you guys next week.